recently my theory on the Happiest Day minigames from FNAF 3 was confronted, because they were vague at best, and in trying to think more about it and what they might mean, I had a sort of epiphany. One that might not only nail down exactly what's going on in Happiest Day, but might solve a massive motif for Five Nights at Freddy's in general. So Slices, put on your aprons and let's bake ourselves a theory. So what am I referring to by the Happiest Day minigames? In FNAF 3, there are several secret minigames you can access in the camera system. On most nights, you can access this minigame, Happiest Day, showing these kids sitting at presumably a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and off to the right, there's an empty dining room. However, throughout the game, there are several other minigames you can access, and if you go out of bounds in these minigames, the first time collecting a cake and every other time finding a child, one by one, children start appearing in that empty dining room wearing Freddy's masks. And if you've done all of the other secret minigames, this last dining room is then filled with 4 kids wearing 4 different Freddy masks and 1 crying child on the right side. You, wearing the puppet mask, give that child a cake, they receive a Golden Freddy mask, and then they presumably move on. At least that's the popular interpretation for this scene. As they disappear, their masks fall to the ground and balloons slowly drift upwards, as if their spirits are finding peace. And like, we can sort of see what this is trying to tell us, but what exactly is going on here? Well, I've made that exact theory a couple different times on this channel, and I still believe my most recent interpretation of it. That being, it's explained if we look into FNAF World, of all things. Yes, unfortunately, FNAF World is very lore relevant. Look, I love the game too, but when we have to take a game that has all these enemies into consideration for serious lore implications, it's a little rough. Scott himself says he regrets tying FNAF World to the game's lore, but it is tied, so we have to talk about it. It's no secret that the clock ending of FNAF World is inextricably linked to FNAF 3, specifically the Happiest Day minigames. Every time we encounter a clock, we're doing a very bare bones minigame that seems to be related to how you access the secret minigames of FNAF 3. The first clock has us placing this Balloon Boy into a square, and to access the Balloon Boy minigame, you have to click a poster of Balloon Boy. To access the Toy Chica minigame, you have to click on 4 cupcakes, and when you collect this clock, there's 4 cupcakes you place in squares. It's almost as if we're setting up the ability to do Happiest Day in FNAF 3. But then, what about FNAF World? It would also have to take place before FNAF 3, and I don't think it could. I think we have very strong evidence to say that FNAF World takes place during or after the FNAF 6 fire, because of the other game that it's linked to, Ultimate Custom Night. Ultimate Custom Night is pretty unambiguously the vengeful spirit torturing William Afton forever after the fire of FNAF 6. Pretty much everyone in this fandom agrees on that as near fact. And it's interesting that both FNAF World and Ultimate Custom Night allow you to visit Old Man Consequences. Not only that, but if you visit Old Man Consequences in Ultimate Custom Night, it unlocks that achievement in FNAF World, as if the games themselves are linked. So with all of this in mind, I for a long time have assumed that FNAF World and Ultimate Custom Night are taking place at the same time, which, if that's true, would place FNAF World during or after the fire of FNAF 6, making it impossible to take place before or during FNAF 3. If Happiest Day and FNAF World are inextricably linked and seem to take place at the same time, and we have evidence to suggest that FNAF World takes place during or after the FNAF 6 fire, then I would argue that Happiest Day takes place at that same time, which would also line up with the spirits moving on after they are last seen. I would argue that Happiest Day and FNAF World are 2 different tellings of the same story. They focus on one spirit trying to assist other spirits in moving on, namely 4 of the missing child incident victims and this 5th child. Now, I hear you, these minigames are accessed within FNAF 3, but that's never been a good indicator on when something takes place. After all, in FNAF 2, we have several death minigames of the missing child incident, of Charlotte being killed, all things that definitely took place not during 1987, sometime beforehand. So, just because a minigame takes place during a game doesn't mean it's taking place at the same time that game is. So, who's this spirit helping them move on? Well, I've said in the past that I believe it's Charlotte Emily. After all, if Ultimate Custom Night and FNAF World are taking place at the same time, then we can use Ultimate Custom Night to help us figure out what's going on in FNAF World. Ultimate Custom Night, like I said, is pretty unambiguously the vengeful spirit torturing William Afton. I believe that the vengeful spirit is Cassidy, the 5th missing child incident victim. And if that framework is true, then it's unlikely that Cassidy is also doing FNAF World, which only leaves us a few options on who could be creating FNAF World, but one death quote from Ultimate Custom Night is very telling in my opinion, and that's from the Marionette.
I don't hate you, but you need to to stay out of my way.
I've used this death quote in the past, and I still believe it to be true, to be telling us, the player, that Charlotte Emily is basically saying like, look, Will, I'm not afraid of you anymore, but you do need to stay out of my way because I'm very busy here. What is Charlotte Emily busy doing? Well, all the spirits of this entire series have been brought into one place and released from their physical shells. So I believe this is Charlotte Emily going out to each of them and helping them to move on. That's what FNAF World and Happiest Day seem to be doing here. Not to mention the supporting evidence from stories like Alone Together from Tales in the Pizzaplex. Now, we don't have a lot of time to go into that story directly, but in that story we see a spirit who doesn't even realize they're dead because their body is undiscovered. They've lost the memory of dying and assume everything is still fine and just go throughout their daily life as they would. It's not until he finds his own body that he receives all of his memories again and gets the memory of his death, therefore allowing him to rest and find peace. This is what I believe the marionette does when it's assisting the missing child incident victims in possessing the animatronics. Charlotte doesn't necessarily have stronger spiritual powers and can teach people how to possess things. It's just that when you have knowledge of your death and realize you're a ghost, in that scenario you are able to much better possess the thing your body is inhabiting. So Charlotte is just showing the victims where their bodies are, giving them their memories back, and in doing so they're better able to possess the animatronics. So like I said, if FNAF 6 truly is the gathering of all of the remaining souls of this series and burning it all to pieces, Charlotte is using FNAF World to reach out to each of those souls to make sure they're able to move on. We actually get a parallel to this at the ending of Fazbear Frights, where Jake uses his final moments to reach out to the victims who are still trapped in that weird purgatory space of the Into the Pit ball pit. He basically goes memory to memory, reaching out to each of those victims and changing their memories, so they're more peaceful and able to rest. This really feels like what FNAF World and Happiest Day is showing us. Charlotte helping the missing child incident victims find peace. And that's where my theory sat. I just liked where that was, I liked how everything added up, it was very evidentiarily backed, and I left it. But there was one major issue that I never really looked into because I didn't think about it. Recently on Freddy Fazbear Pizza Podcast, the weekly FNAF themed podcast I have on this channel, I've been working on making my full Five Nights at Freddy's timeline from 1979 to whenever the hell Ruin takes place. Obviously, I'll make a more flashy and scripted video version of it eventually, probably the end of this year, but this is just to kind of get my thoughts out and show you guys my process on making the timeline, especially before Secret of the Mimic or Escape the Pizzaplex, like, ruins everything. Although, to be fair, I'm a little late on that second part. I didn't finish reading this yet though, so who knows if it's lore relevant. Don't worry, I'm waiting till next week to make a video on it because it comes out on the 1st and I don't want to spoil anybody. Unlike some people I've seen on Twitter posting spoilers 3 weeks before the book is even out yet. But on the podcast, I'm actually nearing the end of that little timeline mini-series, where I'm just going through the summary of the entire timeline and I'm taking feedback and questions on it as I go. And in asking for feedback, I received an email from longtime community member and chatter Jaxolotl. And yes, I say chatter because I do live stream 4 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday at 9 p.m. EST on twitch.tv/RightToastYT. Actually, while I mention that, tonight on this channel and Twitch, I'm going to be streaming Security Breach, but it's me versus you. Essentially, I'm not going to pause the game ever. You guys have the ability to literally electrocute me safely in real life using the chat and stuff, and I've given Gregory a weapon to defend himself. So one of us will make it to the end of the game. Anyway, self-promo aside, here's the majority of the email Jaxolotl sent. I appreciate you taking feedback right now because there was an area of vagueness in your timeline that I believe needs more elaboration. This being the fate of the spirits post FNAF 6 fire. You explained in the timeline that you see Happiest Day and the FNAF World clock ending as two tellings of the same event, with Charlotte and the MCI spirits helping Dave move on by finding his body. While this conclusion makes sense, this explanation is more aligned with FNAF World and doesn't attempt to explain the actual events of Happiest Day in FNAF 3. This minigame shows the spirits of Charlotte and 4 of the missing kids, with the last cake being given to another spirit who dons a Golden Freddy mask before they all vanish. Because this is a very important moment in the story, I feel a timeline does need to specify about what is happening in this moment. The primary question is, who is the kid in the Golden Freddy mask? Given that your explanation mainly involves the spirits helping Dave find rest, my assumption was that you see this kid as representing Dave Afton. That answer makes a lot of sense with the rest of your timeline, but it does raise another point of confusion. Earlier, you claimed that Dave does not possess Golden Freddy, but if Happiest Day is depicting Dave as a kid in a Golden Freddy mask, alongside 5 other spirits in the masks of the characters they possess, this would very strongly imply Dave possesses Golden Freddy. Alternatively, if you believe this kid is a representation of Cassidy, the spirit you claim to be in Golden Freddy, how would you explain this scene alongside Cassidy's role as the vengeful spirit? If you're characterizing Cassidy as somebody unwilling to move on before enacting retribution on their killer, how would Cassidy fit into the Happiest Day at all? I don't believe either of these are timeline-breaking options, but I think they require more elaboration and explanation than you have provided so far. And, like, straight up, they're right. This is a major flaw that I haven't talked about, nor have I looked into, because I haven't really thought of the implications of this scene in the grander context of the timeline. I came to such a satisfying conclusion as to what that means and what Happiest Day is telling us, especially in relation to Shatter Victim, which, if you don't know what that means, we'll get into it, but if you want to watch the full theory, it's right there, without repercussions of how it affects the rest of my timeline. Namely, I don't think the Crying Child possesses Golden Freddy, and if Cassidy is busy doing Ultimate Custom Night, and the Crying Child is the one in Happiest Day who receives the Golden Freddy mask, why would that be if they're not possessing Golden Freddy? It's one of those things that can get missed in the details of a theory. Whenever you're making a FNAF theory, it's huge to consider the grander context that it sits in. Something can make perfect sense, but contradict a completely separate theory you said at a different time. And it's always good to try to catch yourself when doing that, and I missed it. So thank you for that email, Jaxlotto. It's a great piece of evidence to point out. So I started thinking more deeply about this and what this could mean if all of this is true. If I truly believe that Dave, or the Crying Child, is not the one possessing Golden Freddy, then why does he receive the Golden Freddy mask in that instant? Well, when I was thinking about it, I think I've cracked the entire motif of what masks represent in Five Nights at Freddy's, because it all comes down to memory. Finally, it's over. That thing can't dominate my mind anymore.
I'm not done yet. That's right. Makeshift gave everyone one more final week to get your very own MARQ plushie. It is fully funded and will be real, but once this last week is up, it will never be sold again. You have until April 5th. Start running.
Throughout these games, masks have been used in a fairly consistent manner, and laying them all down in front of us, it almost always has to do with memories. Starting with one of the weaker examples, in FNAF 2, we get these in-between night cutscenes where we're seeing the perspective of Freddy, likely as they're being possessed. I believe that the reason we see these visions is the night guard of FNAF 2, Jeremy Fitzgerald, is receiving them in his dreams. And like we learn in Alone Together, when a spirit reaches out to you, one of the first things you might notice is dreams that aren't yours. I believe that this is Gabriel reaching out to Jeremy Fitzgerald because he's wearing a Freddy mask repeatedly throughout his night shift, and that's allowing Gabriel to reach out to him, giving him some of Gabriel's memory. In Help Wanted 2, we collect these blank poppets with different masks on them, and what are they used for? Memorials for the missing child incident victims and Charlotte. One of them, the one for Jeremy, literally having an achievement tied to it called Remember Jeremy. In Give Gifts Give Life, we see the marionette visit 4 different dead children, give them a gift, and then give them life, aka give them a mask of their assigned animatronic. Some people believe this minigame to be the puppet literally stuffing the victims inside the animatronic suits, and I don't think that's the case. I think this is showing us the marionette allowing the missing child incident victims to possess the animatronics, and the way that Charlotte is doing this is by showing the souls their bodies that are already in the animatronics, giving them their memories back. And how is that chosen to be represented in this minigame? Giving them a mask of that animatronic. So how notable is it then that to track progression in the Happiest Day minigames, more and more spirits wearing Freddy's masks show up as you complete the secret minigames? Which got me thinking about Happiest Day in general. Because, like, yes, in Happiest Day, we are going out of bounds in arcade machines to find crying spirits lost outside of the boundaries of it and giving them cake. Suddenly they open their eyes and we see them wearing a mask in Happiest Day. All except for the last child, who we need to glitch through several different minigames going all over the place just to reach them, and we give them a cake as well. Now apply this with how we know memory and moving on and finding peace can work from the books. This could metaphorically be showing us Charlotte going through the memories of the missing child incident victims and finding them deep within that own memory and opening their eyes, showing them their actual memory and allowing them to find peace. But how does that explain the last one? Well, like I mentioned, I'm a proponent of shatter victim, which is essentially the theory that when the crying child died, their agony was spread out among so many locations and so many pieces of this franchise that their spirit and memory fled to those anchors they placed in life. It's something that we can see happen in Fazbear Frights. And all this really means is this creates a wandering spirit, someone who can't quite remember why they died or how. They can't quite remember who they are, unless they go and collect those pieces of themselves that are left throughout the area, which is similar to how the crying child is characterized in the logbook. I'm scared, I can't see, not being able to remember his name. Now apply that to the Happiest Day minigame where we get the last child. What do? We glitch through several locations and several different arcade games, going all over the place until finally finding the crying child. Similar to FNAF World, the whole point of it is that we're leaving breadcrumbs to help somebody move on that can't, going off and collecting disparate pieces all over the place until ending on a box in the middle of the woods, somewhere I think the crying child's body is buried that we see in Midnight Motorist. Until finally, at the end of Happiest Day, he too receives a mask, getting his memory back and being able to move on and find peace. But I hear you, this still doesn't explain why it's the Golden Freddy mask. If I don't think he's possessing the Golden Freddy suit, why does he receive the Golden Freddy mask? Well, as I've displayed in this theory, I think that masks aren't necessarily who you're possessing, it's a representation of receiving your memories. Something that Charlotte starts with at the beginning of these minigames, something that the other children receive throughout them. But then why is the Golden Freddy mask used for the crying child? Well, think about his life. His closest friend was a Fredbear plushie, and unfortunately, his last and likely most powerful memory is of Fredbear's face, more accurately, his mouth. Like it or not, if you had to choose one animatronic of all of Fazbear's to represent the crying child's memory, it has to be Golden Freddy. So my big swing here is that Happiest Day is showing us Charlotte visiting the memories of all of the missing child incident victims who are scattered amongst the FNAF 6 fire and helping them one by one find peace, and consequently piecing together the disparate pieces of the crying child's memory so he can rest as well. And at this point, I believe they can all be labeled Gabriel, Susie, Fritz, Jeremy, Charlotte, and Dave. And one final note, if masks truly are representative of memory in Five Nights at Freddy's, how interesting is it that the current new villain of FNAF is the Mimic, something that wears many masks and forces its followers to wear masks, but all of them are created, fake masks, fake replicated memories. I don't think this mask motif is even close to being done in use. After all, like I recently pointed out, masks are front and center in Murray's costume manner. I am so confident in this theory that frankly, I think it's foolproof. Obviously, it's not confirmed, but I just believe it. And surely you can disagree with my interpretations of a lot of the evidence we have, but I don't think I've made a mistake here. Regardless, in the comments, let me know what you think about this theory. And like I said in the ad, Makeship gave us one last week. This plushie is fully funded. It will be real. So if you buy it, you don't have to worry about getting a refund because it didn't get funded. It is fully funded, but there's only 1 week left, and this guy will never be sold again. That's how Makeship works. So if you want a MARQ plushie, you have until April 5th to get one. After that, they are gone forever. In the meantime, if you want to see me and some other FNAF tubers go into haunted houses, on my second channel I just released the Phasmophobia video with BarBADroid, ARE, supposedly Booney, and eventually my wife later in the video. You can find that right here. If you want your fan art featured on the channel, make sure to share it with #ToastArt. Huge thank you to the best channel members, the Dough Risers, and until next time, as always, stay toasty, slices.